On this episode of Multiple Shenanigans, we will be talking about comedy.
And we'll be talking to John Connor and hearing all his tales.
Who worked on shows such as Black Books and My Family, and he's got some amazing comedy tales.
Especially from his time at the Comedy Store.
Hello and welcome to Multiple Shenanigans. In this week's show, we will be discussing comedy.
My name's Letitia.
My name's Jeanette.
And my name's John.
I just feel like we should explain how hot it is.
Yeah, it's one of those really hot, sticky days that make you just want to be in water.
Yes, for my sins, I bought a house with my wife 30 years ago, and it had a pool in the back garden, which isn't a selling point, but growing family, it's been used by everybody and all the cousins and everybody else. And in the last couple of years, it's been impossible for me to get into.
Oh, no.
Well, you know, when my MS is far more advanced than yours, and it's not about comedy, but we just slid sob it and bought a hoist, which costs a ridiculous amount of money. And on Saturday and Sunday, I went swimming for the first time.
Brilliant.
That's amazing.
I had to get a buoyancy, a proper buoyancy thing, but I was completely shattered. But I wasn't falling apart with the heat.
Yeah.
It affects us. Well, it affects 80% of MS people. Not that anybody knows why.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I can't claim to have a proper pool like you, but I have put my Disney paddling pool in my little concrete yard. And it's deep enough for me to sit in, and I can sort of slouch back at it up to about here. No, the length of me up to here, not the water up to here. But I live in a forest fields on a yard, and I have a yard, and it's got a bit of a slope to it. You can tell when you've got the paddling pool out, because on the left it's about an inch deep, and on the right it comes way up over my thigh. Not my thigh, my calf. That would be deep.
So
yeah.
Have a little paddling pool then.
You know, who needs a big fancy house like John with a proper pool? I've got a Disney
I haven't been
pool.
able to get into it. Don't feel too grand.
I've just got this little skirty thing. With your outdoor activities. So anyway, John, you've got comedy.
Yeah, I've been involved with comedy for 40 years. So the first 10 years, I was a professional writer about comedy. I was the first comedy writer in the country, a regular writer. People wrote about it who were who worked for the Nationals, but only occasionally. I created the first ever column about it, and I worked for a lefty. We were full of radicals, but everybody in that has gone off to become either major journalists or people like me and people like, you know, running all kinds of things. Jazz specialists. It's bizarre. There were loads of people who were working there, and they nearly all became something. Use it as a platform. And I went off and instead of just writing about comedy, I wanted to do it. So I did it.
Wow.
The first thing I did was at university. I joined the review group that we had, which wasn't very good, and Well, some of us, I'm not a good performer, but some of them are very good. And I started writing sketches, and actually one of the ones I wrote was a sub Woody Allen routine, which I didn't quite realise. And it was just, the thing I buzzed on about it was not me being on stage and getting a laugh, it was writing something and having an audience laughing. And that was always the thing that really, really got to me. And, you know, I could have been a stand-up, but to be perfectly honest, I knew I would never be a great stand-up. I would be an okay, lower rung stand-up who would fiddle around and who would make something of a living, but I'd never be as good as the people. You know, I knew Rick and all of that lot, or I wasn't going to touch that, was I? So instead of trying to be something that I wouldn't have been good at, I wanted to work with comics and be a producer and director. And the BBC wouldn't have me because I was too much of a maverick. So I ended up starting my own show at the Comedy Store, which became a sort of a sidebar hobby, really. But all the comics that did it, you know, major stars came out of it.
Wowee.
So you like to be in control rather than on the stage?
Well, not in control as much as just moulding something and working. You know, I had a structure, but I came out of the theatre background as well. And I was a theatre critic, and I was imbued with how theatre worked. And I love the idea of working with performers and creating something jointly, not imposing my will. I mean, I could shape things. Sometimes they came up with things that were brilliant. Sometimes I'd be suggesting something for years. One of them would suggest the same bloody thing, and they go out on stage and it worked. And it was, I've been saying this for years.
That's such a rip-off.
Yeah, that's what happens.
It's bloody typical. Later on, it wasn't like that. You know, I create something, or they, you know, what towards the end, we came up with a whole new format for the show, a section that bizarrely had its roots in a Manchester comedy store who had done kind of rip-off version of my show, and which hadn't been successful. But one of their bits we kind of adapted and turned into something. And because I could put direction to it, and they did what I said would work, they went on stage and did it, and it worked. And it became one of the best bits the show had. You know, it was 10 minutes of absolute joy with 4 comics interacting on the stage.
I guess that's if you're a writer as well, you can put the words into more than one mouth, can't you? Whereas if you are a stand-up comic, I guess you have the one voice to speak from, don't you? So you get that extra multi-layer in with writing, I guess.
Tell me about your comedy, what you're trying to do.
I started, because I didn't do any, I had no real, I did like some theatre-y things at university as well, but I had no real comedy. My brother did stand-up comedy in like the 2000s, and I like went to see him do things, but I had no real desire to do it. And then suddenly, it's almost like when I was diagnosed with MS, then I suddenly, it became a thing that I became interested in. I don't know why, but so I did. Started off by doing improv because there was a class in Nottingham that I could do, and then I did TV script writing masters, because we did a comedy module in that and did a long group sitcom project and stuff. And then started doing stand-up a little bit, but in the same kind of thing that you were saying, I'm never going to be an amazing stand-up. I'm not that kind of performer, I don't think, but still do it a little bit. I run a venue at the Comedy Festival in Nottingham. Fingers crossed will happen this year, but so yeah, just doing like little bits and bobs, still trying to write stuff. We've got our first live improv, we're doing like musical improv, so we'll do a whole musical from an audience suggestion. So we have our first live show week on Friday for ages, since we went to New York to do a show.
Oh, bloody hell. You went to New York?
Get this though. So we were first UK musical improv group to go to the New York Improv Festival. We get there, 2 days later, shut down.
Well, even to be picked for that is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Are you brand new, or you've done it for a while?
We've been going, Rhymes Against Humanity. We've been going, I think, 4 or 5 years now. So yeah, we do quite well in the area, and yeah, I think we're pretty good, I gotta say.
How did they find you for New York?
We sent a tape in of one of our shows. We had to send a whole show, and we've got some quite experienced members of the group, so they're no improv people and have had better training than I have. So yeah, it was dead exciting, and then it didn't happen. So it's.
Well, don't do yourself down. If you had 5 years and you were picked for a New York Improv Festival, you must be bloody good. So you can sing and you can improvise whilst you're singing. I mean, there's a group, which I can't remember, who done the West End, and they're brilliant. And you're a poet. And you do comedy as well?
Well, not so much comedy, but poetry. Yeah, we do a bit of improv poetry every now and then as well, but audience participation poetry. Yeah, a lot of my poems are not so funny. A couple of them are, but yeah. So comedy's not my expertise. So you two are the comedy experts.
But you're a funny lady. At least we both think so, because we're always just like pissing ourselves making this.
Yeah, we think we're funny, so that's okay.
Funny is funny, Fred. You either have it somewhere in you or you don't.
Yeah.
You can't learn it. It's imbued in people.
That's interesting, because I've looked at some comedy courses for learning to write comedy, and I've thought about that to try and to get more comedy into my poetry. I mean, my poems are not sad. Well, some of them are quite sad. They're not all sad, but they've all got a little bit of light something in them. They're not sad and down and depressing. Even if the topic is, they're still quite upbeat sad poems. That's what I write.
It's difficult to put a punchline in when you're talking about death. My favourite comedy line from a sitcom ever, I don't suppose either of you know Steptoe and Son.
Yeah.
Oh, good, you've done your research. My favourite was Albert Steptoe, who was the father, having a pint and putting it on the coffin and saying, "That's the first drink I've ever had on him." Well, I've always liked it and thought it fun. But as you can see, I can't deliver for fun.
Do you have a comedy influence, a big comedy hero or anything?
Who, me?
Yeah.
When I was 14, I discovered the Goons on my own. This, my parents would have known the Goons, I presume. But I suddenly found myself at the library, and I found these things called the Goons, and I got the records home and realised this was just brilliant. Comedy became kind of an obsession. It still is. I'm still listening to comic, mainly American ones. And even though I don't do it anymore, I haven't kind of left it.
Yeah.
You're still in love with comedy.
You worked on some big shows, hey, didn't you?
Well, I did as a casting director.
Yeah.
I worked on Black Books. Black Books was in my zeitgeist. You know, Bill Bailey had been part of my show. Bill did his first stand up on his own in my show because
Wow.
he'd been in a double act and he'd never done stand up, and suddenly he came into my show because he was surrounded by four other performers. It was five at the time. He did music in the show, but he did solitary stand up a little bit, and he learned how to do it there.
Wow.
And he was in it for 4 years, and then obviously became too big. We did 3 series. It won 2 BAFTAs for best comedy.
And I have to confess, it is one of my favourite comedies, and I'm not saying that because you're here, but it is one of my favourite comedies.
It's one of my favourite comedies. It was a chat show. I saw Bill talking about it, and he was in Russia or Lithuania, something like that. And he went through customs, and they started doing routines of his from Black Books.
Wow.
I mean, it's famous throughout Europe.
Yeah.
It's got a life after, because of YouTube. It's got not just YouTube, but Netflix et al. It's got a life that keeps on growing. It's the best comedy series I ever worked in. Dylan Moran is a genius. He's a genius that isn't quite harnessed himself, but he was sort of harnessed in this. And him and Bill, even though the text was beautiful, they would often improvise together, and the improvisations were even funnier, and they often made it into the show.
Amazing.
And so that fitted in with my kind of radical view of comedy. But then I was a casting director on My Family, which at the time, for 10 years, was the biggest sitcom on British television. 10 million people watched it. You know, I think it was still, for a family comedy in prime time, it was still the edgiest one there's ever been. The team working on that were excellent because it followed the American comedy style of team writing. I mean, I don't think other shows have tried team writing, but it was set up by, it was an American set it up who was a big star in the States. I think he'd worked on Cheers. And it was a show he tried to set up in America, but it was far too edgy for American television. You couldn't have a dark character in the lead in an American television sitcom at the time. And they brought it over here, and because it was team written, you know, the scripts would come in, you know, days before we'd start the setup for the show. So in terms of casting, me and my wife, Jane, would have to cast it on the fly. We'd cast it with people we thought were right for the part. There was none of this having to bring people in, or, you know, because it was so last minute, we were casting what we thought would work. And because it worked, we were trusted. You know, I was a casting director for about 15 years, and, you know, that paid at the time really well. Although I think now, because there is such a shortage of staff in television because of Netflix and there's a boom going on at the moment, the power is back in the hands of the creative individuals rather than the people running the companies who try and pay people as badly as possible and rake it all in for themselves. So that's good, but I had to stop.
But you're still doing like, is it the column that you do on what's it, MS News?
MS News Today. Yeah, I write because I was I'm a writer. I was a journalist for 10 years. I started writing this column 4 years ago, and I apologise for not having any laughs in it. Although I think my editors were more than happy because they don't like, because I often put things that are so edgy they have to take them out. But I get a lot of, well, that made me throw up my coffee through my nose, but I can't print it.
I did at the comedy festival a couple of years back. My first, like, a lot of people didn't know that I had MS and stuff because I met these comedy people after because I had it quite bad at the start and then got on the big drugs and then I'm a lot better. So they didn't know, and I did stand up. But there was a few moments where you could see people like, oh my God, can she actually say that? Because I was just like, I can't even think of anything that I dare say. But I was just talking about my experience. So I was like, yeah, of course I can say it. It was me.
Yeah.
But I think it was a combination of not knowing that about me and also not knowing whether it's okay to laugh.
I only ever wrote one joke about MS that I could do because I don't perform. But if I was a sit-down comic, I would start with, well, I'm the one person in comedy who has to use a catheter. So I really am the one person in comedy who does take the piss out of himself. How long have you had MS, you two?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed at 33. I'm 52, so it must have been 19 years ago. 20. That's terrible, isn't it? 43,
Yeah.
50, 19 years ago.
Don't ask me to work it.
Yeah. How about you, Jeanette?
I think it's coming up to 15 years.
And how about you, John? When were you diagnosed?
I had my first sclerosis in 2006, and I finally had a second one. So I officially had MS in 2009. And there's a long story about how I actually finally, in the end, got my diagnosis, which I wrote about. And so I've officially had it for 11, 12 years. But when you get MS later in life, it tends to be, which they didn't know at the time, but they do now, it tends to be aggressive, and mine is like a Scottish drinker. It's very aggressive. It's attacked me. I've had most of the drug. Ocrevus was holding it back. I liked it, but it was destroying. As usual, there's always something. After taking Lemtrada, it was destroying my immune system.
I had Lemtrada, or alemtuzumab as it was back then.
So you've had Lemtrada and done well out of it. I had Ocrevus, and I was taken off that after about, and didn't even manage a year on it. And my neurologist took me off it overnight. I turned up to have an infusion, and I was actually stopped going into the infusion because I suddenly to the hospital. So I was really annoyed and screaming, "I need this!" Although it might have given me PML, which is brain cancer. So I had a couple of relapses 5 months later, and effectively after that, could do nothing. I couldn't stand up on my own, look after myself, went out the window. And I effectively I'd had a little bit of, I wasn't quite SBMS by that time, but now I am secondary progressive, and there's little we can do in this country. So, it's just a general decline. So I'm not you're not having that sort of outcome. It's, MS happens differently to everybody. Mine just happens to be horrible. Da-da! Got no punchline.
It is so difficult because everybody's is so different, isn't it?
No two the same. That was the mantra of the MS Society for a long time.
So I was on one of the trials for Lemtrada. This was ages and ages ago. So me and this girl had it at the same time, and I just really did well, and like we had our infusions together, and we would go back to the hospital like all the time to do our paperwork and be checked, and kept going back. This was in Sheffield, and it really worked for me, and it just didn't for her. But the funny thing is, it's not funny other than her mum was a really nice lady, and she gave us cake when she would come when we had to do things. And mum came up to me on our final appointment, and she just went, "I would have thought it would have been you who would end up worse. What with you being what'd she call me? Just some kind of pathetic waif of a thing." I couldn't believe she was saying it. And then I looked at Sarah, and she was absolutely pissing us off that her mum had said this, and I was like... So yeah, we laughed.
Oh, can I just mention, I had a lodger from South Africa that came and stayed with me about 15 years ago. And my family came on, and he was delighted because he'd seen it at home in South Africa, and he just loved it. And he said, "I can't believe you still got it on here. This is amazing." He was just so delighted.
So this has been our episode of Random Comedy, and thank you so much, John. It's just been a pleasure to hear your stories and your experience of the comedy world.
Thank you, John. So I've been Letitia.
I've been Jeanette.
I've been John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks very much. Bye.